behalf of InfoWars, I regret that we mischaracterized Chobani, its employees, and the people of Twin Falls, Idaho, the way we did. In our commentary about what had become known as Pizzagate, I made comments about Mr. Alefantis that in hindsight I regret and for which I apologize to him. We were participating in a discussion that was being written about by scores of media outlets in one of the most hotly contested and disputed political environments our country has ever seen. We relied on third-party accounts of alleged activities and conduct at the restaurant. We also relied on accounts of reporters who were no longer with us. This was an ever-evolving story, which had a huge amount of commentary about it across many, many media outlets. As I have said before, what became a heightened focus on Mr. Alefantis and Comet Ping Pong by many media outlets was not appropriate. To my knowledge today, neither Mr. Alefantis nor his restaurant, Comet Ping Pong, were involved in any human trafficking, as was part of the theories about Pizzagate that were being written about in the media outlets and which we commented upon. I want our viewers and listeners to know that we regret any negative impact our commentaries may have had on Mr. Alefantis, Comet Ping Pong, or its employees. We apologize.
Yesterday evening was the first time I saw this photo. It was shocking and it was horrific.
How do you account for one of your nicknames that's listed in the VMI yearbook in 1981, Coonman? What's your explanation for that?
My main nickname in high school and in college was Goose because when my voice was changing, I would change an octave. There were two individuals, as best I can recollect, at VMI. They were a year ahead of me that called me Coonman. I don't know their motives or intent. I know who they are, but that was the extent of that, and it.
Everyone in the media is talking about the most important thing that has ever happened in the history of humanity, or at least since Caitlyn Jenner became a woman, a transgender woman. And that, of course, is the release of Black Panther. It is so deeply important. Climatologists who have said that global warming is an absolute fact and anthropogenic global warming is an absolute fact. They have very different measurements as to how large that effect is going to be. There is a broad range among climatologists, as far as I can tell, among how much the climate is going to actually change and what is the direct impact of carbon emissions on that, given the fact that for the last 15 years there has been no global warming. The single largest study of global warming that was done in Britain, it turned out a lot of the data was actually kind of falsified. So I'm not saying that it's not happening. It may be happening. I'm happy to say that it may be happening. I may even be happy to say that it's probably happening. But again,
Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez made his first visit to Haiti Monday, promising more than $20 million in aid for various projects. Haiti was the last country on Chavez's presidential trip that included 5 countries and simultaneously shadowed political enemy President George Bush's 5-country tour of Latin America. Upon his arrival, thousands of jubilant slum dwellers greeted Chavez outside the airport. Not one to miss out on a moment with his admirers, Chavez leaned out of his SUV, grabbing hands and bumping fists with the people as he drove by. The elated crowds chanted, "Long live Chavez" and "Down with Bush," as the presidential motorcade moved through the sea of people. Meeting with Haitian President René Preval at the Venezuelan embassy, the two presidents enjoyed small talk and met with the Union of Venezuelan Army Engineers who are working on various development projects throughout the capital. Chavez said that he was extremely moved by the emotional response from the people of Haiti, and added later that it was his country's duty to help the beleaguered nation, citing several historical connections. Venezuela is not a member of the 9,000-strong United Nations mission in Haiti, aimed at restoring order and a functioning democratic government to the country. In fact, Chavez was openly opposed to the controversial departure of former President Aristide in 2004, and the U.S.-sponsored interim government thereafter.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. We're broadcasting live from Brooklyn, USA, where left is best as it is everywhere else, with super producer Matt Leck.
Hello.
Chief economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
Super producer David Slavic, roaming the digitosphere in the ever-expanding, ever-growing, ever-global TMBS universe. On this week's program, we are back from our sojourn, and Francois joins us. She is a social activist, former aid worker in Haiti, as well as the founder of Uncultured Company. We're talking about the uprising, the movement, the potential revolutionary moment in Haiti right now, how it connects to Venezuela, and the modern political development of Haiti that can connect, in your mind, the removal of President Aristide backed by the Bush administration, and maybe also these U.S. mercenaries that were arrested in Haiti, discovered with a cache of weapons, and then just, released from the country. Won't face any charges here. We're also talking about how Ilhan Omar continues to crush it. She had some fun with Brett Stevens. Bernie is in. And while we will be, as we are with everything, critical supporters, I think TMBS is definitely quite happy about this entrance in the race as he crushes the first week, raising $10 million out of the gate. And
27 of those were mine.
nice. I was away, but I'm going to be fixing that this week. Definitely getting my 27 in to help the effort as Bernie Sanders strong out of the gate. We're going to review some of what he's been doing in the first week. Lula da Silva, 600,000 people have moved forward to nominate him for a Nobel Prize, the world's most prominent political prisoner. We will explain why, again, how it fits into all of the contours and patterns that we see in the global system today, the new Condor years in Latin America. Plus, we're going to talk to you about our live show in LA, April 20th. We are incredibly excited about that. And it's an open post game tonight. Normally, this is locked and just for patrons, but we're going to have it open for all of you watching on YouTube and then later listening on the podcast. And we are talking about the Independent Group, which is a new nonsense British political effort to, I don't know, like wash Tony Blair's car. I'm not quite certain of this, but we will talk about it. We also have some embarrassing clips of people trying to destroy progress in the UK. We'll also talk about Amy Klobuchar, more Bernie Sanders, throw Bill Maher in the gulag and propose who his replacement should be. Hint, me. And talk about ominous news from the Middle East. Zarif resigning as foreign minister of Iran, as Benjamin Netanyahu forges an alliance bringing Israel even deeper into a full confirmation of far-right extreme racism. So it's a packed show.
Are actually regressive.
Oh, man. It's time. I'm jet lagged, but I have a lot to get off my chest. And let's start with this. Over the past weekend, the United States and self-appointed leader of Venezuela, Juan Guaido, attempted a spectacle. Using humanitarian aid as a pretense, the U.S. attempted to break through the border into Venezuela. These attempts were rebuffed. If the U.S. wanted to relieve Venezuela, it would eliminate sanctions and send its aid through the UN or the Red Cross or other reputable aid agencies. And in fact, the politicization and spectacle of aid is another incredibly damaging effect of U.S. foreign policy on the Venezuelan people, as well as, of course, some of the abuses and crackdown by the Maduro government from some of the protesters as well. And again, let's reset here by being real about the whole situation, but also getting back to some extremely basic principles that so many are working so hard for us to not understand here. But before we get to that, let's get to this. This is Donald Trump, who I think is actually, in his own bizarre and grotesque way here, being very honest, which is that there is a crisis of legitimacy in the United States, in the whole Western world. And I say Western not really as a geography, but almost as a mind space. Capitalism is in question. There's a profound cynicism about the oligarchies and inequalities that define our lives. In fact, the same policies that have been exported and demanded by Western governments, the United States, and multinational corporations and institutions like the World Bank and IMF that have locked into place austerity, inequality, and abuse in places, across Latin America, Africa, and so on. They've migrated home. That's been one of the great stories. Of course, this began in the Reagan-Thatcher era, but it's significantly increased, and that's part of the map of the world you see today. So Donald Trump, whose economic populism scam is basically done, is out doubling down on white nationalism and racism with the border wall, but now he's bringing back the 80s religion of red baiting in an attempt to not only take his presidency out of the dumps, which, again, let's face it, this presidency has never had a 50% approval rating. That's very bad. That's pathetic. What he wants, and is joined by the elites of the Washington consensus, U.S. corporate interests, and all the other usual suspects, is not only a distraction and an imposition of a new Condor years in Latin America, but a reaffirmation of order. Here he is in Miami.
Socialism promises prosperity, but it delivers poverty. Socialism promises unity, but it delivers hatred and it delivers division. Socialism promises a better future, but it always returns to the darkest chapters of the past. That never fails. It always happens. Socialism is a sad and discredited ideology rooted in the total ignorance of history and human nature, which is why socialism eventually must always give rise to tyranny, which it does.
Now, of course, socialism is actually a rising, profoundly important, and dynamic ideology which has contributed to U.S. history in the form of the labor union movements. If you go back even, of course, to the deepest eras of the apartheid in the American South, American communists were at the forefront of organizing against it. And of course, all of the examples that we know from Scandinavian and other countries in the Eurozone that have produced basic, obvious human outcomes like universal health care as examples of socialism. But then we go into the developing world. And this is the paradox and the problem with the conversation around Venezuela, which is that on one hand, of course, there's internal failings in the Venezuelan government. But then on the other hand, anytime you've had a government such as Hugo Chavez's Bolivarian government, or Michael Manley's government in Jamaica in the 1970s as two of endless examples, essentially attempting to replicate not Cuban-style socialism, but really something more analogous to the New Deal or social democracy in Western Europe. They have been ruthlessly undermined by U.S. intelligence agencies, sanctions, disruption, and abuse at every single step of the way. So that is the pattern here. And now let's acknowledge it. There's been mismanagement in the Venezuelan economy. There was never a pivot to oil. So as the commodity prices went down, this has had a huge effect on what Venezuela has been able to do. And in fact, the reliance on a commodity boom and making a sort of pact with capital in that form and environmentally extractive industries has been a problem for all of the pink tide center-left and left governments in Latin America. There has been no response in working on things like the exchange rate, which Greg Wilpert, who is a very important analyst at The Real News and a founder of Telesur, has pointed out was essential in order to rein in things like corruption and capital flight. And the Maduro government has absolutely responded harshly and committed abuses. We can be real about this. That is objective reality. It does not mean that they're not also anticipating and responding at times to profoundly real threats. So when John Oliver rolled his eyes last year about Maduro suggesting that the United States wanted to assassinate him and that there was an interest in a coup, well, in addition to all of the events that were unfolding then with Mike Pompeo musing about it as the then head of the CIA, we now have Marco Rubio getting pretty overt about the sociopathic designs of U.S. foreign policy in Venezuela. Just a picture, a before and after of Muammar Gaddafi, who was, of course, after being, and of course, no love for Gaddafi at all, obviously, after he was removed from power in a UN-sanctioned but violated airstrikes because they went far beyond the UN mandate, he was sodomized and murdered in the street. Marco Rubio is suggesting publicly that this is a model for Venezuela. Chavismo represented people taking control of their own lives. There's no doubt about that. It was a new experiment in radical democracy, and there were real achievements in workers' rights, rights for women, Afro-Indigenous people, a brilliant constitution, as well as redistribution and poverty relief, particularly in years of the oil boom. And some of these networks have been maintained under Maduro, which is why even those who have been sidelined and oppressed under the Maduro government inside the Bolivarian movement, of course, are lending critical support now in opposition to the coup. We know that there needs to be a democratic diplomatic process that averts a catastrophe here. Everybody knows that besides the coup mongers. The United States is now aligning itself with a new right-wing circle in Latin America. Of course, Jair Bolsonaro's fascist regime in Brazil, in Colombia, in Argentina under Macri, and in Chile. And so if you go back and think about the Condor years of the 1970s and 80s, this was a campaign of state terror that, quote-unquote, fought socialism with the full backing of the entire foreign policy apparatus of the United States. Over 60,000 people were murdered and disappeared. Salvador Allende was ousted from power. Democratic governments across the region were ousted from power with the active backing of the State Department, the CIA, and of course in Central America in the 80s, you saw some of the most horrific atrocities imaginable, backed by, of course, Elliot Abrams, the Trump administration's point person in Venezuela. In Colombia, Iván Duque Marquez ran a campaign much like Bolsonaro that painted his opponent as aligned with Chavez, the FARC, and a supporter of feminism. And he has attempted to undermine his predecessors, who was a center-right leader, his peace pact with the FARC that was moving Colombia forward. In Brazil, Bolsonaro, of course, has praised the military dictatorship and is openly taking aim at the indigenous people, labor unions, and many others. The political imprisonment of Lula da Silva was an essential step, as Lula and the PT was a counterbalance as the largest country in Brazil and the region to U.S. hegemony. And Lula's latest letter from prison again has restated that Brazil cannot be a servant to the United States in this fashion. The recently elected president of Paraguay, Mario Abado Benitez, is connected to that country's former dictatorship as well, and now Chile and Argentina both have resurgent right-wing governments. We need to be clear that what is happening in Latin America is a return to those Condor years, and we don't need to, we can make meaningful distinctions. The Workers' Party in Brazil had many important vital successes. Lula was a unique and exceptional leader. Chavez was a great leader. They both had serious failings in different regards. Maduro and Ortega in Nicaragua, we could probably pretty roundly and systemically criticize. However, we have to recognize that in this context, they are the target of a far-right counter-reversal in the region, which will only lead to outcomes far worse than what they provide. And that is where the sort of simplicity actually emerges on some level now, which is that this must be opposed. We need the analysis that sees all variables and is intellectually honest and rigorous, but the effort to reimpose in the most blunt, violent, and grotesque means possible to work out the insecurities of oligarchs inside North America and reassert that domination in such a raw form needs to be opposed actively and categorically, full stop. Guys, we are running a little tight, but do you have anything to add?
I just want to add two quick
please.
things. One is that I think it's really important to recognize, because a lot of Americans have a difficult time when they're talking about what's going on in other countries, is forgetting that, you know, there is a national bourgeoisie in Brazil, in Chile,
Absolutely.
in Colombia, and in Venezuela that has been very threatened by Chavez. And it's important to recognize that those alliances, right, exist without necessarily like the United States imperial interests. They benefit greatly from them, and that's why they're using them today.
Right.
And the second point I wanted to make is, you know, we should be worried about the new consensus that we've been seeing in the media when we're talking about support for the Maduro regime. We see these graphics, these infographics all the time, and they say, look, these are the countries that support Maduro, and these are the countries that oppose him. And it's very clear that there is a white European
100%.
coalition that is trying to take out Maduro.
And every time you see in social media, just to be blunt, you know, if you do a video on how Lula is a political prisoner, or how, of course, you know, again, I think we've staked actually a very obvious and broad-based and smart position on Venezuela that includes necessary critiques of Maduro, but the bottom line is an opposition to coup support. You will get flooded with comments from people from these countries. And that's fine, and I respect it. And if the perspective is legitimate, I'll hear it. But, you know, bear in mind that the class basis alone of who you're going to interact with, by and large, on social media. I talked to a contact I work with in Brazil. I was like, look, you know, your average Workers' Party's base is not sitting on their iPhone in, you know, some nice high rise in a prominent city in Brazil, arguing with gringos on Twitter. Those who are part of this far right emergence. And, you know, that's the bottom line.
As regards to what this means for Bernie, you know, I've been thinking about, it's been since, I think, Truman, since a president has called for the CIA to be abolished. And I think Kennedy, privately, he said, I wanted to break it into 1,000 pieces and scatter to the winds. I've dismissed a lot of the Bernie Russia stuff. I think it's nonsense. Like, I don't like Tad Devine, that whole subplot. I think it's silly
bullshit. It's just about political consultants being sleazy.
But I also know that, like, when Bernie talks about military intervention, it's kind of a way around saying these covert operations that we've always done, right?
That's right.
And I don't think Bernie can fight that fight. Right, because there's no abolish CIA. There is abolish ICE, but
there should be a hashtag abolish CIA.
There should be, but there's not really anything there for him to launch pad off.
Right.
So it's just it's a strategic. I think it's hard for him because he can't. Because I think you are going to have, especially when you have this like resistant CIA lovers, right? Like I'm just curious how that's going to play out, and I think that might explain some of his tentativeness.
And it's also just and just regards to this, resistant CIA lovers thing. I mean, first, just two other really quick points because I think it's really important. Let's go back to Iraq for a second, where I think a lot of people who were in their late 20s through 30s kind of cut their political teeth one way or another. There was no complexity about the Saddam Hussein regime, okay? That was a hideous, brutal, murderous, genocidal, actually. You can apply that word to it. Opposing that invasion was beyond the right call in every way, shape, and form. Politically, morally, there's everybody knows. If you're still supporting the invasion of Iraq, I don't know, you're Tony Blair or George W. Bush or just some total crackpot or somebody that, can wash their hands with it because it doesn't matter to you because it didn't kill and displace your family or, blow off your son's leg as a soldier or your daughter's leg, right? So there is a part of this where I love the instinct to try to figure out how do we actually solve these problems? Who do we want to support? How do we, figure it out? That's great. But there's a very problematic American attitude where, like, the condescension and supposed obligations of empire get transferred to your Twitter account. And there is a way in which it's like, guys, you know what? Sometimes things are really complicated. I would encourage you to, of course, people like us and others, try to do, read and think about as much as you can. But sometimes you just have to go with the simple takeaway. That is no coup, no invasion, period. Full stop. And the second point with regards to these resistance types, look, it's one thing that they don't have a structural understanding of U.S. foreign policy and intelligence services. That's a huge problem, but a lot of people don't. And that's a failure of many different things that we have to work to rectify. But by their own logic, let's do it. The fact that you're going to run around rightly calling Donald Trump an inhumane racist who cages children, who has zero regards for, he's deporting plenty of Venezuelans. There you go. Those Venezuelans have absolutely fled the country for a variety of reasons, including the failures of its own government. And if one is so concerned, why would you deport them back there? Just as so the notion that you would correctly say that this is an administration of racist, immoral buffoons, but then also say, but we should probably, give them and their 1980s death squad PR man a fair shake on potentially one of the most aggressive and catastrophic things one could possibly do in the hemisphere is breathtakingly stupid. And I hope that people will, I don't know, smell the coffee on that, do some reading, get out of your head. It's really okay to hold simultaneous, thoughts at once, but also hold to some very clear principles. And some like, don't intervene in Latin America, don't back coups. And yes, Donald Trump is a disgusting racist and does not care about the well-being of anybody in any of these places. Full stop.
And if they cared about Venezuela, they would lift the sanctions. And that's
precisely
the first thing you should
There
say.
you go.
Yeah.
There you go. You want to help the Venezuelan people? Lift the sanctions. Okay, let's do the shoutout. Let's get to the shoutout. DJ Danarchy, ably assisted by the finest broadcaster of our time. I was in Puerto Rico. I totally lost track of the Alex Rosenborg. And I'm okay with that.
It's been kind of quiet, actually.
It's really messed up in places where it gets to lose track of it's really important. Ilhan Omar, we love her. She continues to crush it. Brett Stevens continues to just be like, why? Like, what is the why of Brett Stevens?
From what perspective?
Just he's boring. He really is just, I don't know. I guess he's just sort of like the ultimate, like, I don't know, millennial Gen X, times conservative, where your parents can be like, or whoever, like, hey, I don't agree with him about, I don't know, carpet bombing the Middle East or something, but he likes I don't know, the Green Book or something. What I don't get Brett.
I mean, he's a concern troll for capitalists, basically.
Okay, that's much more elegant than my explanation. I liked his Elon Musk column. Like, the first half was great because he correctly said Elon Musk was just a government contractor with a ridiculous brand. But then the second half of it was just like, and that's why we should give up this pipe dream of getting rid of the internal combustion engine. It was like, oh, okay, Brett. So Brett Stevens is a concerned troll for capitalism. He's going to go and try to restart Ilhan Omar beef after, of course, the horrific smear campaign and freak out about her a couple of weeks ago. And he's going to try it again. The Maduro regime is enforcing the starvation against its own people. At Ilhan Omar is outraged, right? Now, of course, this is about the stunt of opening the country to this aid that the United States is trying to do, which would facilitate a troop presence of at least Colombian troops in Venezuelan territory. It's breathtakingly cynical, and if you cared just about delivering aid, you could immediately funnel money to the Red Cross or the UN or other reputable agencies, as well as, of course, I mean, that's the minimum one. Obviously, bottom line, of course, you could lift sanctions. So this is just bullshit concern trolling, and he's just trying to get back into the Ilhan Omar game.
I don't think you should necessarily respect Congress people, but if we put all of the tweets New York Times columnists added to Congress people, would there be any more disrespectful than this one?
No.
Like, what the fuck is he? What kind of behavior is this?
No,
from
it's
New York
totally,
Times?
it's entitled, it's bratty, it's stupid, it's disgusting, it's disingenuous. It's Brett Stevens. And Ilhan Omar knew exactly how to respond. And this is actually great, though, because this is kind of the flip side of it, which is like, look, if you're going to treat a congressperson, and of course, there's no doubt that she's a black Muslim woman with a scarf, who wears a scarf because of her faith. Obviously, that's part of why he feels so emboldened to be such an asshole. But she's going to say, all right, well, allow me to also dispense with niceties. And that's how she becomes the TMBS Shoutout of the week, which I have a feeling she might be a pretty regular contestant for. She writes, Brett Stevens, agitated for the Iraq War, called for war with Iran, supports assassinating foreign leaders. I'm not surprised he doesn't know the difference between opposing military intervention in a foreign country and supporting the regime. And that's about it. Go fuck yourself, Brett Stevens. All right. We're going to do a brief pitch, and then we have to get to Francois. So, guys, help, obviously, look, I think at the next patron level, we're doing a push-up contest. 2,500 patrons.
Oh, yeah, when are we eating this shit?
I don't know. Well, that's what I wanted to say. We need a bunch of new patrons tonight, and we need to, look, we're going to do it sometime next month. But make sure a lot of the problems is just Patreon, but make sure all of your stuff is in order so we don't get we don't want to drop below 2,000 with that decline.
Yeah, we don't want to eat it and then drop below and have to eat it again.
Yeah, guys, exactly. Well, that won't happen. We're gonna eat it well into next month when we're well past the hurdle.
I mean, it has a long shelf life.
Yeah, it does.
The survival
It will
food.
survive for life. So
that's a relief.
Yeah, thank God. At 2,500 patrons, a push-up contest, and I'm thinking of something for 3K. But look, the bottom line is there's just a huge amount of additional content for patrons. We're cooking up an idea for 21 and above patrons of about one video illicit history a month. And I'm talking with a video editor who works from some pretty prominent sources about that. So that would be another offering in addition to those calls, which don't worry, getting right back into the rotation of. It's time to join, guys. Patreon.com/TMBS, Patreon.com/TMBS. Let's also get up this, the Bootleg Theater. TMBS Left is Best West Coast Fest.
Left is Best Fest West?
Left is Best Fest West. April 20th at the Bootleg Theater with amazing guests. Big Waz, Wozni Lambre. You know him from Count the Dings. Of course, you know him from me, from all the work that we do. You know him from Woke Bros, which if you haven't yet, get on the bomb feed on iTunes and subscribe to our podcast. No, that's not it. Yeah. So, yeah, scroll down. So, and Waz, of course, is amazing. Then the brilliant Ana Kasparian of the Young Turks. She's amazing. Another comrade of ours. And, of course, the also relentlessly brilliant Nando Vila. It's going to be an amazing show. You know, whatever. We always say this, but it's the truth. We've only had them on sale for a couple of weeks, and they're deep in. And people, just as with the New York show, are making big trips and booking plane tickets and this and that. So
probably might not want to wait as long on the New York show.
I would not wait as long. I would go get your tickets today. And of course, become a patron today. We're going to take patreon.com/TMBS. Links for all these other things will be in the show notes. We're going to be right back with Francois.
Keeping carried interest for private equity firms, keeping carried interest for real estate firms, that's just President Trump hooking himself up. But are Democrats going after it in the right way? Because at the end of the day, there are a lot of people who think President Trump is morally reprehensible, but they think, I want my taxes cut, I'm going to vote with him. And when Democrats continue to say, down with the billionaires, we can't stand the rich, a lot of people want to be rich. So is it the right message that the Democrats are going with?
It's so effing wrong.
Whoa.
I've talked to Schumer. I've talked to Wyden. I've talked to Pelosi.
And said what?
And I said, if you use the term billionaires again, I'm done.
Why?
Because it's aspirational. I didn't start with anything. Just penalize everyone that's done well. We all want to do well. And we should be the party of doing well. We should be a party of business and leadership. And it is very, very disturbing when I hear the millionaire or billionaire word. And I've told them to stop it, knock it off. Because everyone wants to do really well. And this is the world of aspirations.
Then are you worried that the Democratic Party is going too far to the left?
So much so, it drives me nuts. So much so, it would make me quit the party. And I've made it very clear, I'll cut your money off. And others will do the same. We've had enough.
Okay.
We need a new brand.
And what is that brand? Because right now there is an opportunity. If Democrats lose, for example, in the state of Virginia, if that isn't a wake-up call that the Democratic leadership needs to get together and say, we've got to find a middle ground. Because if the Democrats continue to go far to the left, you've got that whole group in the center that aren't going to go the way of Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. And then you're going to fracture the party.
Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is Francois. She is the founder of Uncultured Company. She's a social activist and former aid worker in Haiti. France, thanks so much for being with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Mike.
It's a pleasure. So can you tell us, we'll get to the present moment in Haiti definitely, of course, over the course of this conversation. But this is, this is a history, at least a contextualizing show. We like to talk about the lead up to things, the why of something. And and it's kind of arbitrary, I know, because obviously, and you can go there if you want to. I know that, the context for what's happening now could go back hundreds of years, obviously. But can you give us at least for purposes of this question and the setup, but as I say, you can go anywhere you need to go. Back to 2004, the Bush administration, the removal of President Aristide and who he was, and just sort of like a run up of the kind of like recent Haitian political history, its relationship to the United States and Venezuela, and where we are today. And I know that's a lot, and you can take as much time as you need. I just want to get everybody sort of on the same page with this setup here.
Sure. Okay. I'm going to try to give you guys the brief modern Haitian history 101. So actually, before we even talk about Aristide, we need to talk about Duvalier.
Okay.
Francois Duvalier, and then, first hit the father, Papa Doc, and then the son, Baby Doc Duvalier. So, as many of your listeners already know, during the era of the Cold War, the U.S. had a policy of being very active in its quote-unquote back door to prevent the spread of communism. And if that meant propping up dictators, then so be it. So Haiti actually had several decades of the brutal dictatorship of the Duvalier family, which was passed down from father to son. They were actually referred to as Father Doc and Baby Doc, Papa Doc, Baby Doc. And so in my mother's lifetime, living under the Duvalier regime that did not even end until 1986, the year that I was born, Haiti was a hub of tourism for the U.S. It was relatively economically stable. However, people lived in absolute utter fear and terror for their entire lives. Like, your neighbors could be disappeared with a knock on the door for saying the wrong things. You never knew who was working for the state government and who was actually your friend. And sometimes entire towns were obliterated because they harbored people who are anti-government and actively fighting to overthrow the regime. And so this level of state-sponsored violence spawned the first wave of Haitian migrants that came to the U.S. Finally,
can I ask one more question about the Duvalier periods, actually? Or just two parts. One was, is it true that this, in addition to that support, one like concrete manifestation of it is that the CIA helped train and set up one of the most like brutal intelligence services or secret police in the Caribbean? And two, what were the Duvaliers like? I don't know. I won't make a comparison, but like, did they sort of like have this fusion of being like right wing, kind of like aligned with the United States, anti-communist state, but also like very affirming of Haitian culture? Like, I think like did like things like traditional religious practices and stuff like that. Was that kind of like how they got their legitimacy? Just those two side questions on it, I'm curious about.
So it's really interesting how Francois Duvalier, who's known as Papa Doc, came to power. He is actually a product of the U.S. occupation of Haiti. The U.S. occupation of Haiti used Marines from the Jim Crow South who were actively racist, actively anti-Haitian, actively anti-Vodou, which is one of Haiti's national religions. And so because of that, there became almost like a Black supremacy movement in Haiti to respond to the white supremacy of the U.S. occupation.
When was the occupation? I'm sorry.
The U.S. The U.S. occupation of Haiti was for a 20-year period beginning in like 1914.
Okay, got it.
Right. So when the U.S. Marines leave, this movement of Black supremacy remains, and and because it was an active response to not only the U.S. Marines, but also the whitening of the state that was going on in the DR. They rally around things that they consider African and really reject this idea that we're a Creole society made up of different people, and say that we're Africans, we're Voodoo, all Haitians are Black, and it's a complete, really, it's a historical revisionism that happens. And a lot of the average people had experienced a lot of terror and violence under the U.S. occupation. So this reaffirmation of Black pride really spoke to the people. And the elite really didn't pay attention to it because they thought he was like a mild-mannered doctor. Nobody really took him seriously. But when he comes to power, he, in the very same way as President Trump, follows up on all these really outrageous campaign promises that he made to take the elite out of power, all of these things, like to, put Haiti back in the hands of Haitians. And he consolidates power in a way that is so quick and so brutal that the regular people who have been in control didn't even have a chance to respond. He just completely killed his enemies quicker than they were able to respond, and consolidates power and terror into the hands of the state. And because he affirmed himself as anti-Castro and anti-communist, the U.S. was fine with keeping him in power, fine with providing weaponry and training and whatever else the state needed, because anything that wasn't communism was fine.
Right.
Like, you could massacre Haitians, that's fine. And so what happens in Haiti is finally in 1986, the Haitian people have enough, and they run his son, Jean-Claude Duvalier, who had come to power, out of the country. At this point, the family had plundered the Haitian National Reserves, living this lavish lifestyle. And the Haiti that we know today, which has been sunken into poverty, really comes into play in that era. Before then, Haiti was wealthier and more stable than the Dominican Republic, its neighbor. But this is the period where we see the modern Haiti come to place. And at this time, when the people are really frustrated, a priest comes to the forefront, who is, actively preaching liberation theology, positions himself as a counter to the corruption that a lot of people saw in the Catholic Church, and in aligning themselves with the dictatorship's regime. And he survives many.
This is Jean-Bertrand Aristide.
This is Jean-Bertrand Aristide. So Aristide is a priest. He survives many assassination attempts from the Tonton Macoute, the secret police of the Duvaliers. And finally, when Duvalier is run out, he becomes the first president elected post the dictatorships. And immediately, he's a liberation theologist, meaning that he believes that the poor should inherit the earth on earth and not have to wait for the kingdom of heaven. And he's actively trying to aim for land reforms, taking land away from the elite Haitian families and giving it back to the people, asking France to pay reparations back to Haiti, really taking a far left stance. And things were going fine until, coup d'etat. He's taken out within just months of being elected. And part of the deal for him to get power back was with the U.S. government to make many concessions in terms of getting rid of the Haitian military, relaxing the trade tariffs in Haiti to allow for the import of foreign goods from the U.S.
I just want to make sure everybody's following along. So he emerges as this incredibly important leader. Like in the 80s, he survives assassination attempts and galvanizes the poor. And, people can look up, but I think most people would know, but liberation theology is an incredibly important left-wing force in the Caribbean and Latin America, but also in Ireland and other parts of the Catholic world, basically. And so in the early 90s, he's in power. He gets elected to the presidency, but there's a coup. He is actually restored to power. The coup is actually sort of, there's a counter action to the coup by the Clinton administration, but as part of that deal, he kind of comes back to power, but sort of like, with the kind of implicit deal with the United States of like, sure, you can come back, but you're going to need to really tone it down.
Yeah. Not only you're going to tone it down, but you also have to give up some of your power to the U.S. So Haiti had at one point had some of the highest tariffs in the Caribbean, so that most Haitians, like my mom will say that when she grew up, you ate whatever you grew. Now, flip it around, just in 30 years time spent, Haiti imports 80% of what it eats. So it's very much susceptible to food insecurity. When there's a international shock to the market, Haitians have to go hungry. And within this period that Aristide comes back, he becomes completely paranoid and mistrustful of all the people around him. And he then becomes exactly the thing that he spoke against. So he gives weapons to young gang members in the same slums that where he came up with. He completely stomps out dissent. And again, you see another wave of Haitians fleeing that political repression from the same person that they thought that was going to be their savior. And so really what the period that we are in now, like, we have to be honest that Haiti has never had a truth and reconciliation moment. There has been no conflict resolution. None of these parties have ever been held to task. Francois Duvalier died. Jean-Claude Duvalier, his son, died without ever standing trial. So Haiti is in a period of what we call Duvalierism without Duvalier, where the Lavalas party of Aristide and the Duvalier supporters actively undermine the Haitian government. So there really aren't there. If you go online, there are many political parties listed. There was like 30 political parties listed for Haiti, but really are these two elements are the only ones that actually matter. Like, everyone functions within these realms, and they're almost like shadow governments on top of the international actors.
So those are like, and so there's the party that inherited the mantle of Duvalier, then there's the Aristide party, and also the reason, like when you mentioned him giving guns to people in certain gangs, like that's, and again, like you see this in a lot of places, but correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be like, in addition to, like, part of these like parallel governments are having like paramilitary arms of parties that can like basically like clean up neighborhoods if they're not going to vote the way you want to have them vote, punish people or burn places for voting a certain way, reward, like kind of set up like patronage networks and have like a kind of like physical conflict in parallel with the voting conflict. Kind of, I guess, like we've done illicit histories for patrons of like Jamaica in the 1970s. Like there might be kind of some parallels to that. Would that be a good way of thinking of it?
Yes, very, very much so. So because the state is weak, to keep power, you have to invest in a parallel state of yourself, which means your own parallel government, your own parallel institutions, and then the state apparatus will never actually function because there's always this other parallel system undermining it. So when Aristide basically takes the power of state violence and gives it to gang members called chimeres, this is completely a destabilizing source, and it sinks Haiti back into the same cycle of fear and repression that existed during the Duvalier regime, because again, there has never been a reckoning for that period. There's never been a moment where anybody was held to task, or anybody in the government at all has paid for any of these crimes. So all of these things now impact what you see today, in that the government continued to consolidate the power in hands of the few, regardless of what the majority wanted or the majority needed. And now the majority is like, this is too much. This has gone on too long.
So, and I definitely want to get to that in a couple of minutes, and then and that's a really interesting distinction, because it seems like maybe this is a moment potentially where it could be a revolutionary moment in the sense of like an actual restructuring of power, not just like replacement of faction over faction, which is both obviously really important, could be amazing for Haiti. It will still face obviously a huge amount of outside pressure and influence, and also is another good reason why this very, you know, simplistic and shabby coverage of like, you know, violence in Haiti is just, I mean, not only wrong, but really boring, because what's actually happening is just objectively incredibly more interesting and significant.
Right. So this is a movement by Haitian people to take back their democracy. And that in itself is revolutionary. But as we know, what happens after the revolution is much more important than the revolution itself. And the longer that this goes on, the more destabilizing it can become, because the reality is that the last government that Haiti had, Martelly, was aligned with the Duvalier government, had put a lot of people into his cabinet that were from former Duvalieristes. This current government, Jovenel Moïse, he was basically handpicked by Martelly, and I want to also mention that Martelly was handpicked by Hillary Clinton in the State Department, and so
with the campaign assistance of Praz. So, Boo Praz. Look that up. A very bad mark on the third most important member of the Fugees.
Right. But even more interesting than that, his actual campaign was run by the same people who ran the current Dominican president's campaign. But that's not the show we're having today.
No, actually, I'm curious. What is the name of that firm? What's the name of that firm?
I don't remember the name of the firm, but it's a Spanish firm. I could look it up.
No, we'll have more conversations, but that everybody should look in general at political consulting firms and how they're sort of deployed in terms of, you know, U.S. foreign policy for sure. But anyways, okay, so that's a line now you're saying of the government currently in power in Haiti. Explicitly, I mean, the whole structure across the board is problematic, but the one specifically in place now flows from Duvalier, and Martelly was he was like a singer, right, before he went into politics, and now okay, so basically, could you say who the current president is, and then can you talk about this, like, the Venezuela connection specifically, or even, and maybe that's wrong, but the reporting that I've seen has been that like there's always a precipitating event, right? And so it's like, it seems like part of the precipitating event was that the Chavez government offered a very favorable loan, I think of $4 billion to Haiti, under the sort of his effort to consolidate alliances in the Caribbean and Latin America. He explicitly said, we owe a historical debt of gratitude to Haiti for supporting us in our colonial revolutionary efforts, and we want to repay it. And so it was this great policy, and this process of what you're talking about, of like state capture or whatever you want to call it, that money was squandered. And that this has been, a sight of rage, and of course, in this much bigger context.
Right. So I think it's important to say that all aid is political by nature.
Right.
And that's really important, especially in the current context of what's going on in Venezuela. So Haiti, since the Duvaliers, has been sunk in this cycle of aid that, along with this weakened government that's consolidated power in the few, the role of foreign aid and international organizations has really undermined any type of structure of systemic civil society that Haiti could have. Because if you finish med school in Haiti, but Doctors Without Borders is providing free clinics, nobody's going to come pay you as a doctor. Right. You know, if you apprentice to become a shoe cobbler, but Tom's is passing out free shoes, nobody's coming to your business. So what happens is that all of these things that, you know, Americans love, like to send their T-shirts and their teddy bears and buy one, get ones, all of these things end up actually undermining the Haitian government, the Haitian economy, and Haitian society as a whole. So what Venezuela was trying to do very strategically is say, look, Caribbean, not just Haiti, look, Caribbean as a whole, let's stop letting the U.S. undermine our economy and make us puppets and quote unquote slaves to their political will. I'm going to give you this money, really low interest rate, and pay it back when you feel like it. Yep. And so this was a way for Venezuela to exert its political power and become a buffer to the U.S. And it pissed the U.S. off. Like, it really pissed the U.S. off. Yeah. So all of a sudden, you go from USAID, the World Bank, the IDB, the IMF being major players where, you know, the Caribbean had to go to and beg for money, to Venezuelans saying, no, I got you. So Venezuela gives Haiti $4 billion, and it's $4 billion over the course of time with a 1% interest rate, and to be paid over the course of 25 years. So, and the idea was that they sold Haiti this oil at a very, very low rate so that Haiti could use the revenues to finance social programs like schools, hospital, roads that have traditionally been built by foreign entities in Haiti, whether that's the USAID or a development bank or a World Bank. All of these social benefits that here in the U.S. we take for granted, down to trash collection in Haiti, is being provided by somebody else other than the government. So this money was supposed to prop the government up, and it disappears. And so a Senate report comes out and it says 1.7 billion of that money, nobody can account for it. The projects that were said to be done never came about. The ones that did come about were severely overfunded. One of them, which is a project run by the current president of Haiti. And initially the report gets no attention. And then at the end of 2017, a guy named Gilbert Marimbo goes out on Twitter with a very simple hashtag, Petrocaribe, which basically means where's the Petrocaribe money? And this
is a good hashtag. That's solid.
Right. It's a great hashtag. Yeah. Like literally everybody from Haitian musicians to the diaspora community, everybody jumps on it, and it becomes a movement. So people, young Haitians, use social media, WhatsApp, Instagram, so on and so forth, to galvanize themselves. Everybody's holding up the picture with the hashtag. They organize marches in the streets. And this is one of the first movements that has been organized by the youth and completely on social media in Haiti. But this has been going on now almost for a year, and it's been met with crisis after crisis. One of them was the oil crisis last year, where the IMF tried to get Haiti to raise oil prices on the backs of the people, and the people rose up and said, hell no. And the longer that it goes on, the more opportunity there is for it to be co-opted by radical elements. As we saw, these U.S. mercenaries were caught with a truck full of guns just riding around Haiti. And the threat of having the government just refusing to even like sit down or even acknowledge that the protest is even going on, to make some concessions, to really figure out what's next, is that people will become frustrated and they'll become more radicalized. And what could have been an opportunity for a peaceful transition or some concessions that really put somebody in jail, because 1.7 billion doesn't just disappear in a country like Haiti. Every single prime minister and president in the past two administrations have been involved in this, and yet nobody's been held accountable. So the frustration builds on the street, and the government ignores it, and it's going to become a powder keg. And so, as Venezuela currently, experiences its crisis, every Haitian knows that we are now in debt to Venezuela at about $140 each Haitian. So all 10 to 12 billion people in Haiti is now indebted to Venezuela, and Venezuela is going to need that money back. They are clearly not currently in a position to forgive a loan. And so the question then becomes, how are we going to pay that back, and who is going to pay for these past mistakes? And as long as those questions aren't answered, people are going to stay in the streets.
So, first of all, I mean, I definitely hope that we can have many more conversations. We only have about a minute left, and I honestly, you actually did a great job just then of just sort of summarizing where you think the state of things are now. If you had to leave, basically in the last minute, if there's anything else that you think is really important to convey about this, tell us.
Sure. I think what's really important to know about these protests is that they are inherently democratic, in that in the way that government functions in Haiti is that it must be representative of the people. And when it no longer is representative of them, it has to go. And that doesn't necessarily mean waiting for 4 years for an election in Haiti. Another thing is really important to know is that it started off as an anti-corruption protest, but it's become a condemnation of the entire Haitian system as a whole. Because as I said, there are no opportunities for economic mobility for people. The international system has made it impossible for Haiti to actually build a society that can sustain its people in terms of healthcare, education, even infrastructure. And the cost of living is incredibly high. So there's a lot of conversation in the U.S. media about like burning and looting and all those buzzwords that people use specifically for people of color taking to the streets. But the underlying truth to it is that these people have felt for a long time that this system no longer represents them. And all of those things that are owned by the elite, by foreigners, are not things that they'll ever get to use. So, for example, a liter of milk in Haiti right now costs half the daily minimum wage. So when someone is looting a grocery store, that might be the only time they'll have milk that year. And
you sure would too.
Right. And so we need to put these things into context, and that this is really a struggle for the soul of Haiti, and hopefully the players in power will make the kinds of concessions to share Haiti's wealth and resources with the majority of its people.
Francois, she's the founder of Encultured Company. She's a social activist, former aid worker in Haiti. We have links to all the ways that people can find your work. And as I say, I hope we have you on again soon. France, I really appreciate your time.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks. Two things. One, I want to be shameless. This main show in and of itself is you become a patron. Like, these conversations are really important. And sometimes it's worth echoing that. So I'll do what I think to be a legitimate shameless plug here. The second thing I want to say that's really interesting to me is we've been very critical on this show of anti-corruption politics, because generic anti-corruption politics have been the handmaiden of global far-right fascism. We're seeing Donald Trump drain the swamp, the whole Lava Jato farce and horror, which we'll touch on a bit in a couple of minutes because we have a little bit of an update on President Lula. In India, there was actually people affiliated with the BJP and Narendra Modi who used a lot of, and of course, as in most of these cases, in some cases legitimate stories, but a targeted systemic campaign to undermine the Congress Party. That helped, which is a very flawed political party, but nonetheless the center-left option relative to far-right nationalism of the BJP and the overt bigotry of a Modi. What she explained there in Haiti, that's the difference as far as I'm concerned. A campaign against and protests about corruption has turned into a systemic indictment of a parasitical state and global capitalist system which is exploiting Haiti as a place. So instead of corruption's this horrible problem, and corruption is done by basically either the center-left political party or an incredibly important leader or labor unions, and now some strong man is going to come in and fix it. And this is the fascist model that we could see back from Italy in the 90s to Sergio Moro in Brazil to Donald Trump and Orban, all the usual examples. Relative to, this is a massive corruption scandal. And what does this say about the whole thing? We're going to get out on the streets and attempt to reorder the political, social, and also international relations of our place. That's totally different and a completely distinct way of responding to corruption. So I want to make that distinction. I think it's useful. All right, let's get to David Griscom for I'm a little too jet lagged, but let me just say little fuck, still doing his little economic update. Actually, I heard that there might be potentially like Richie Aprile and Uncle June. There might be an alliance being made to move on David Harvey.
Is there really?
Is there really? Way to yes and. All right, do your segment, go.
Well, first I just wanted to thank Andrew World again for
yes.
the great graphic. Check him out on YouTube and on Twitter. But yeah, let's pivot. We have a housing crisis in the United States, and that crisis has been getting worse over the past 20 years. As wages have stagnated, housing costs have gone up dramatically, especially for renters. And renters tend to be more working class, more people of color, and younger people on average. So this is a very significant issue that affects around a third of the American population. Since 2001, the median rent per person rose from $512 a month to $678 in 2015. That's an increase of 32%. In fact, the Pew Research found that since 2001, gross rent has increased 3% a year on average, while income has actually declined by an average of 0.1% annually, falling from $56,531 in 2001 to $56,516 in 2015. So what we're seeing more and more is that housing prices, basically the cost of living, are increasing, and people are unable to pay that. And what that means is that more and more people are falling into what is called rent burden. 38% of all renter households were rent burdened. That's an increase of around 19% from 2001. And it gets worse the further you go down the pay scale. And what we have seen is that the for-profit model of housing has created this crisis because there's this contradiction between the use value of homes and apartments, right, where we live, and the exchange value. This is what happens when you pump up property values at all costs, and apartments become a source of investment rather than a place for people to live. Talk about a city like New York. Right now, there are 79,000 units that are not rented. And this rate actually significantly increases when you reach the upper levels of monthly rent. So this is rent around $2,500 a month or more. Around 8.74% of all units priced above this range are empty. So what we're seeing is, while people are really searching for, affordable living houses, that we're having apartments that are just left completely empty because people have other uses for apartments. So they use them for investment. They use them for Airbnb. They use them to stockpile money. And this is like the ridiculous rent prices in this city are bad enough. But you know what? The affordability crisis is not just a New York issue. It's all around the country. In fact, it gets really bad when you look at other metro areas. A study by the Joint Center for Housing Studies found that in 101 of the nation's largest metro areas, a majority of poor residents are severely cost burdened. Overall, 59.7% are severely cost burdened of low-income renters. So you look at a city like Tucson, Arizona, which is about in the medium range, 84.9% are rent burdened, and 75.1% are severely burdened. And these are workers in the 25% of income range. In Columbus, Ohio, which is number 23 when it comes to affordability, nearly 90% are burdened and 80% are severely burdened. And the worst area in the country for low-wage workers to be able to have a home, remember what we're talking about. We're talking about people who are working and are unable to live. 94.8% of poor residents are cost burdened, and 89.2% of low-wage workers in Las Vegas are severely rent burdened. And it's important to recognize that this is not just a question of people trying to, it's a question of affordability, but it's also an issue of working class power. Think about being in the terror of a situation where you're working a job, and we talk all the time about how people don't have any savings. We talk about how wages have been stagnating, and we're talking about people who not only that are spending so much of their time just to pay rent, so that they're much less likely to ask for better wages. They're much less likely to report abuse. They're much less likely to organize. This is a calculated, terror regime on working class people in this country, and we need to take it seriously. I very much support Daniel Cohen's piece in Jacobin this week that calls for, I guess earlier in February, but it calls for a massive investment in building 10 million public housing units as part of the Green New Deal, because guess what? The housing crisis does not just affect us economically, it's also a serious environmental issue.
Right.
The building sector is responsible for 39% of U.S. energy consumption. Jesus. So we need to have a massive investment in public housing, in green housing, and we need to reclaim our cities and make them places that people live rather than just places that people are able to park money. And when we're talking about when we're talking about the kind of buildings that are being shot up around the country right now, you see this, especially around the areas outside of cities, where we have these 3-story units, which are made out of, cheap wood and cheap materials. These were supposed to be for people in public housing, and now they're being used to create apartments that are priced way above any kind of reasonable rent price. And it's something that we really need to take seriously, because we're seeing people having lower quality housing in general, and then many, many people unable to afford housing in the first place.
100%. Yeah. And I'll just say, as somebody who growing up, there was a huge amount of housing precarity, including evictions and lots of moving, and then a huge amount of housing precarity throughout my 20s. In addition to it being an innate wrong in and of itself, it's one of these other things that's like the stress levels that puts on you, whether it be in work or academic performance, is astonishing. It's massive. So there's also just this huge psychic toll, which correlates with all of the material conditions as well, obviously. All right, we're going to do a few more things, and of course, we are going to have an open post game tonight. So, but I want to remind everybody. I mean, it's probably too late. I should have done this in the beginning of the day or the beginning of the show. Actually, did I? Today's election day, and of course, all props to Nomiki Konst. We want her to get in there to become New York City public advocate. All props to her.
Polls are still open, so if you
the polls are still open. Look,
if you're listening, haven't gone, go.
Walking distance of a poll, you're listening to this or watching this. You know, open this up on YouTube on your phone, stick in your headphones, and run over and vote. All right. Let's do this Bernie sound first, and then we've got a little bit of a Brazil update in the global update. But this happened while we were on break last week. And this was just Bernie Sanders doing collective wish fulfillment for all of us in so many ways, down to like, why the fuck is anybody even asking a question about Howard Schultz? And I've used this, and plenty of other people have made this point that I love that Bernie does here, which is like, I don't know. I know incredibly politically sophisticated teachers and union activists and building supers. And, you know, I mean, I could think of so many people who don't have a professional connection to politics who clearly know infinitely more than Howard Schultz does about every facet of our political and economic system. And no one's asking them to run for president. No one's giving them a CNN town hall. And frankly, I you know what? If you ran an experiment where you took, and I won't even just say a random person, take somebody who had some degree of legitimate accomplishment in their field, but let's put it in the, you know, something with a human benefit, education, healthcare, whatever. Maybe let's throw a little union organizing background. And you crowdsourced like several $1 million, and there was a kind of concentrated effort to do a media blitz about them. I don't know if you could really run this experiment. My point is, I think it would be incredibly easy to match the poll interest in Howard Schultz right out of the gate. And on a approval level, in terms of like, you could get people in front of this candidate and they might say like, well, I don't know if I'll vote for this person because they've never held office before. Maybe that would be a concern for them. Maybe not. But they probably would say, I like them a lot more than Howard Schultz. So this is Dickerson last week asking Bernie about the Howard Schultz threat, because finally Howard Schultz is, you know, it took him only a couple of days of out there flailing around media, showing he has no idea what he's talking about, to show his cards and basically be like, look, if the Democrats will nominate a candidate who will leave the American oligarchy intact, I will not burden you anymore. But if you nominate somebody real, I would say read Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, particularly Bernie Sanders. But either of them, I'm running. And this is how Bernie responded to it.
Howard Schultz has now said he would not run as an independent if the Democrats nominate a moderate.
Oh, isn't that nice? Why is Howard Schultz on every television station in this country? Why are you quoting Howard Schultz? Because he's a billionaire, all right? There are a lot of people I know personally who work hard for a living, who make $40,000, $50,000 a year, who know a lot more about politics than, in all due respect, does Mr. Schultz. But because we have a corrupt political system, anybody who is a billionaire, who can throw a lot of TV ads on television, suddenly becomes very, very credible. So what Mr. Schultz, what is he, blackmailing the Democratic Party? If you don't nominate Bernie Sanders, he's not going to run? Well, I don't think we should succumb to that kind of blackmail.
The other reason is that he represents an argument that some people make, which is if you're worried about Donald Trump, the Democratic Party, to win voters in various parts of the country, needs to pick somebody who is not so radical. That's also what his theory represents.
Well, I think his deeper theory is, hey, I'm a billionaire, leave me alone. And let me make as much money as I can without paying my fair share of taxes. He's a billionaire. He's thinking of running for president. Suddenly he's a very famous guy. That is a problem.
So good.
That is just fucking great. I mean, you know, whatever. Obviously, always wanted Bernie to get in this race. He's always my first choice. But I mean, I wondered for people who, either they had valid criticisms or they just let this sort of drumbeat of kind of silly social media propaganda about him. I wonder when they saw that if it was like, you know what? I'm reminded this is actually a really good dude. I'm glad he's out here doing this.
We needed
incredible Schultz dunk.
Just because this Schultz thing was getting so fucking bad and nobody was doing anything.
Nobody was
national
doing
stage.
Yeah, it's just like, and literally, and also him doing. I love he basically did an impression of me doing an impression of him. Oh, I'm supposed to back out. Oh, because of Mr. Macchiato, man. Go fuck yourself. Fuck you, John. Fuck you, Howard. I know school bus drivers in Rutland, Vermont that know infinitely more about politics than that fucking joker. All right. We're going to do a little Brazil update. Oh, let me just say this too. I did get this in the Discord. Of course, Discord, one of the many benefits you get as a patron from TMBS. I will be honest, I am remiss in I did not know who Carrie Ann Lucas was. She was, though, from what I was able to see in this brief period of prep, an incredible activist. She passed away. She was only 47 years old. And I'm going to quote a bit from Rewire News now. On Sunday, the disability community lost one of its most dedicated advocates. Carrie Ann Lucas, 47, was a beloved mother and nationally recognized attorney who lived in Windsor, Colorado. She's also a professional colleague, mentor, and dear friend. She had a rare form of muscular dystrophy, and she used a power wheelchair and ventilator. She also had low vision and a variety of other difficulties. She was instrumental in passing in the Colorado State Legislature the Family Preservation for Parents with Disabilities Act, and I'm quoting again, which aims to ensure that parents with disabilities are not discriminated against by the child welfare system. Speaking to Rewire News about this bill in May 2018, Lucas explained it. In my parent defense practice, between 75 and 80% of my clients in child protection cases had disabilities. Oftentimes, disabled parents are not receiving the accommodations they're entitled to. Too often, decisions are made to prevent children from going home without providing parents a fair opportunity to parent. There are now efforts underway to rename this bill the Carrie Ann Lucas Act. So, another great warrior for what's right. She passed, but she did incredible work and helped many people, and we honor her today, Carrie Ann Lucas. So thank you for that reminder. Okay, this is what's happening in Brazil. Two parts. One, a kind of systemic assault under Bolsonaro. And you'll see how this all kind of fits together. And then how this it's inseparable from the political imprisonment of Lula da Silva, and anybody with pretensions of any type of progressive leadership must speak on the system's assault in Brazil and the imprisonment of Lula. But we're going to set this with a very good report by Michael Fox for the Real News Network on how this, and it starts with the unions are organizing against the attempts to gut the pension system, which we covered recently, and there was a great report from Brian Mayer from Telesur on this. And Michael Fox is the report begins with that, but he's putting it into a broader context as well. Let's check this out.
Bolsonaro's plan so far appears to be this. Take any issues that might be areas of leftist resistance or social organizing and bring them clearly under his control. Here's one example. In January, Bolsonaro removed the authority to demarcate indigenous lands from the National Indian Foundation and handed it over to the Ministry of Agriculture, which is led by Teresa Cristina, the woman who used to head the Big Ag Caucus in Congress. The responsibilities of the Labor Ministry have been divided up among 4 different government departments in a symbol of the butchering of labor law and workers' rights. The registration of unions falls under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Justice, led by Minister Sergio Moro. This is a concern for labor leaders, as Moro is the former judge who jailed ex-President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva on controversial evidence. In January, Moro announced that he would choose a federal police officer to oversee union registration. Over Twitter, Workers' Party President Gleisi Hoffmann announced that the criminalization of the union movement had begun. Hoffman and others fear Moro and his people may move to strip the legal registration of unions as a way to weaken labor organizing in the country.
You know, Brazil really matters in this new Condor years in Latin America, because what you have, and there's really good reporting on this as always, everybody, as I always say, you need to be reading Brazil Wire every day to understand Brazil, but also the systems of what's happening across Latin America right now, because you're going back to a totally subservient sort of position relative to U.S. military presence and interests in Brazil. The Brazilians so far have kind of publicly stated that they won't go along with any U.S. invasion of Venezuela because it would, in fact, be catastrophic for the Brazilian military. The Venezuelan military is stronger than the Brazilian one. But them playing this role at the border and them sort of acquiescing to all kind of U.S. military demands and expectations puts them in a very vulnerable position to do that. That runs parallel track with this ruthless war on any form of progress and protection. That's indigenous people, pensions, unions, and everything. And of course, that's what Wall Street wants. That's what the investor class wants. That's how you generate new markets. That's what they mean. You gut a public commons, you turn it into a scarce resource, and you generate new artificial profit bubbles which can get gobbled up by speculators, which in fact might lead to economic numbers that look good for Brazil while all of this economic terrorism and political terrorism is taking place by the Bolsonaro regime. And that's very important to connect all of those threads here. And, you know, again, Brazil, as the largest country in Latin America, is essential to understand what is the plan for the whole place. And, you know, we talked a couple of weeks ago about a new set of just increasingly ridiculous convictions against President Lula. At this point, there's the clear recognition that, again, going back to that Lava Jato, the sprawling corruption investigation, which identified some absolutely real cases of corruption in the state oil company in Brazil and across all political parties, first was weaponized specifically to target the Workers' Party. Look up and re-review the profoundly corrupt, illegitimate judicial coup that removed Dilma Rousseff from power, and the complete acceptance and tacit support from the then Obama administration and Clinton State Department. Then you need to remove Lula, because Lula, despite this constant demonization and constant harassment and lawfare and rumor spreading, is still a giant of Brazilian history and still, as of last summer, the lead presidential candidate. He's still the most important and most popular politician in Brazil. So you need to take him off the board. And Judge Sergio Moro basically just asserts. That's why he literally is in prison for indeterminate acts. And I will keep covering this and repeating this. This is obscene and terrifying. And every single Democrat, every single person should be hollering from the rooftops about this obscene political imprisonment. But it was done clearly, and of course in defiance of all sorts of international law and so on, and the recommendations of the UN Human Rights Commission, and even of a letter of concern by many members of Congress, and most importantly, the popular will of Brazil. He was put in jail and taken off the presidential field because he almost certainly would have won. But now, the new moves against him are including blocking him from going to his brother's funeral, keeping him in solitary confinement, layering new charges on him that are even more frivolous than the original ones that he got convicted on, are clearly aimed to erase him from history and personally cause him maximum suffering. These are sadistic, disgusting people. And in the latest case, we talked about the judge who replaced Moro a couple weeks ago, her new findings against Lula being even more tenuous and ridiculous than the last. And you could look up videos that I've covered on this, actually in that case for Majority Report, and I would also look up Brian Mayer as well. I won't re-review all of it. But one thing that recently emerged was that Lula's lawyers wanted a forensic analysis of this judge's legal decision in the latest Lula case. And they've actually come forward with pretty compelling evidence that she basically just copied and pasted some of the original findings in the first conviction and put it in that conviction. Another judge has ruled that the vigil that has taken place as an act of democratic defiance around Lula's jail cell has to be dismantled because it causes a public risk. And there's also talk of putting him in a more obscure prison. So this is disgusting, obscene stuff. And again, can you have, and this is not the right time to have it, can you have a broader conversation about the deals that the Workers' Party made, about how campaigns are funded in Brazil and all sorts of, there's no doubt. The conversation has never been about whether or not accommodations are made for corruption and campaign fundraising. That's Brazilian politics. That's the same way politics happens in the United States. The same way politics happens everywhere. And in fact, when Lula was universally praised for moderating, that's part of what people meant. So I will continue to say people must speak on this. It's just absolutely morally grotesque. And one way that people are speaking on this is this campaign, which gathered over 600,000 signatures to nominate Lula da Silva for a Nobel Peace Prize, which of course he should receive. And he should receive, and I'll read now from a piece by his former foreign minister and Dilma Rousseff's defense minister, Celso Amorim. I'll read a little bit about his piece, from his piece on this that appeared in the Morning Star last week. I joined Argentinian human rights activists a few weeks before, I'll start from the beginning rather. 6 days after President Lula's arrest, Adolfo Pervez Esqual launched through an online platform the campaign for former Brazilian President Lula da Silva to be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. A few weeks before, he had been with Lula at his namesake, the Institute Lula, and mentioned the idea. I joined the Argentinian human rights activists on that visit, led by jurist Carol Proner. On that occasion, Esqual based his proposal on Lula's work to eliminate hunger in Brazil and the influence of our Zero Hunger program had across the world, both by example and as concrete cooperation program in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa. The importance of Lula's initiative did not go unnoticed by several world leaders. The French President Jacques Chirac joined our president in a global campaign to combat hunger and poverty in which other heads of state joined, such as Ricardo Lagos from Chile and Jose Luis Zapatero from Spain, besides the then UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. And now, skipping ahead a bit, obviously all of this effort would have meant little if it were not for the Lula government lifting about 40 million Brazilians from extreme poverty, which took Brazil out of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization's World Hunger Map. I believe it returned a couple years ago under the illegitimate presidency of Michel Temer's austerity. This feat, without precedent in history, resulted from political will and mobilization, ability rarely seen, and it took place in a fully democratic setting without violence or conflict. This has made Lula one of the world's most admired leaders among other countries, irrespective of their development level or ideological inclinations. He also talks about his diplomacy across the region and as well as with Turkey and Iran. I'll add just the last graph of this. All of these facts bring to mind when one speaks of Lula for the Nobel Prize, the phrase former President Barack Obama, who said of Lula, quote, "He is the man." So he should get that prize. We all need to continue speaking with him, and this is just frankly really unacceptable that more and more members of Congress and more even, frankly, I think media leaders in our space have not taken the mantle of this. This is a profoundly important political prisoner, and the treatment is just obscene and a stand-in just for the wholesale attempt to eliminate labor, in fact, really across the world. We're going to do an open post game and we'll get started in a couple of minutes. You get a sense of what we do. I'll admit, probably we'll get a little bit punch drunk here with the jet lag, but fun times will be had by all. We'll take your Discord questions. We'll take your calls. We've got a bunch of Bernie sound to get to. We've got to talk about the relentlessly awful Amy Klobuchar as a doorway to this embarrassing, pathetic attempt of Blairite, Tory, whatever the fuck nonsense forces in the UK to create a new political offering that nobody wants and likes in the United Kingdom, even as they continue to go through crisis. There's going to be a conversation that I'm going to have with Daniel Bessner, which we're going to post as an additional thing for patrons this week, in addition to the usual illicit history call this weekend with 21 and above patrons with me on Skype, patreon.com/TMBS, patreon.com/TMBS. Get your LA Live show tickets quick, folks. And, of course, spread the word. Thanks, everybody. Thank you to Matt. Thank you, David. Thank you, David. Thank you, Forrest. Thanks, each and every one of you. We'll see you for the post game in about 10 minutes.